Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again. Luffy achieved everything. He found the One Piece. He reached Raftel. He became the Pirate King, and it destroyed him. When the strongest pirate in history suddenly wakes up years in the past, alive, surrounded by people who were once dead, it should feel like a miracle. But Luffy doesn't smile. He doesn't celebrate. He's tired. Now his crew, the Whitebeards, and even the Marines can feel it. Something happened at the end of the Grand Line. Something that made the Pirate King wish he had never reached the top. This isn't a story about chasing the dream. It's about surviving what comes after you win. Disclaimer. This story do not belong to me. The author is Curse by Jennifer Wilson. Respect to author.
Chapter 14, No Regrets. So, Sabo, Ace began, what the hell? Luffy is busy munching on an ever-diminishing pile of meat, much to the collective awestruck horror of the Whitebeard pirates. Bets had started to roll in by the time Luffy gets up to politely ask for seconds. Now, he is onto his fourth serving, and has slowed down only to listen to the conversation between one supposedly dead brother and one nearly dead brother. Same here. You know how unpleasant it is to wake up finding out that your stupid brother was sent to impel down to be executed, and your other brother voluntarily went after him. Worst case of post-amnesia I had ever experienced. Sabo shoots back, dusting his hat. Ivankov had declared his work was done once Luffy and he were safely rescued from Marineford, and had proceeded to dash away to his own kingdom. Apparently, he's got a visitor to his isle, and he wants to fully interrogate the disrespectful man that had invaded the peaceful shores of Kamabaka Kingdom. Sabo doesn't really want to learn more after that. Sabo, in the meanwhile, had decided to get to know his brothers a tad bit more and had leapt onto the ship after Luffy had been thrown on. He still thinks that Luffy and Ace were 7 and 10 respectively, and it's a shock to find out that 10 years have passed without him, even if he had lived as a revolutionary for those 10 years. It'll be good to catch up on those missing years. Everyone is politely pretending not to listen to their conversation, but Ace is loud, and Luffy is also loud, and the three are sitting extremely close together in order to talk to majority of those who were kicked out of the infirmary are probably eavesdropping. It's not like I wanted to get captured. Ace protests, and I didn't want Luffy to come after me either. I wanted to rescue you. Luffy interjects between bites of food. Because you're my brother. Idiot brother. Who ended up rescuing who in the end? If I recall, it was me. Sabo says, drawing the attention of both brothers to himself. If I wasn't there, the damage would have been a lot worse. There was pronounced grumbling at these words. The Whitebeard pirates had been unhappy that the grand commotion they were about to cause was interrupted, but that's not to say they aren't appreciative of the cover that Ivankov, Inazuma and Sabo himself had given when they had retreated. I didn't want anyone to rescue me. Ace holds his head with his hands. If it weren't because of my cursed blood, I shouldn't have existed in the first place. So many people were harmed because of me. Ace, the 1st Division commander, comes up to them, holding a mug of brandy. Your blood doesn't matter in this. Luffy loves you. Luffy nods enthusiastically. Sabo loves you. We love you. Hell, even Thatch likes you when you're a ball of rage. You have a right to exist. And besides, Whitebeard went forth to claim you. That probably gave him superior, dad, status. Sabo follows up with a finger pointing in the general direction of the infirmary. I don't think blood really matters. Look at Luffy. He didn't even know he had a dad. Luffy had been the most adorable kid, and didn't lose any of his childishness as he grew into adulthood. Somehow Sabo could understand this, even if he didn't exactly share the same deadbeat parents that they had. Granted, Ace knew about his father, and the pair of inbred aristocrats whom he called parents really didn't deserve the right to say that, but hey. At least they chose their own dads. Luffy had Shanks, Ace had Whitebeard, Sabo had Dragon, he supposed. Dragon probably won't be able to dad as well as Dayton. Sabo finds himself giving his own 2 cents on the matter. I hardly ever saw him anyway. It was mostly the other revolutionary army. All 3 of them stared at each other. As one, both Ace and Sabo plonked their heads on the table. Our dads all suck. Sabo turns to look at the empty plate lying on the table. Luffy had stretched his arms out, before starting to snore in a corner. Ace continued to look at both Luffy and the remnants of Luffy's 4th serving of meat in disbelief, mouthing how. He's asleep. Ha ha ha, he said as the Whitebeard pirates started to collect and quarrel about their bets. Never change. Luffy, Then, he felt a slight tingle in his scar, a premonition of what could come up next. Ship sailing on starboard side. Bearing the flag of 3 heads and crossbones. He heard the watchman cry. It's Teach. Sabo knew it. Things were going to get worse. Teach had been a bit agitated. Nothing had worked out as it was supposed to. It all started out when he had tried to get the devil fruit. Oh yes, he had eaten the yummy yummy no mi, as disgusting as it was, and gained the power over darkness. But Thatch had survived, and he had been discovered prematurely. So he had escaped, enjoying the powers of the long sought after fruit he had yearned for. Then he decided that the next thing he had to do was to get a crew. If he were to become a pirate king, he had to get his own crew, his own fleet even. Straw Hat had been a good choice, and he can't believe that Straw Hat was so close, but he hadn't known how high Straw Hat's bounty was. It was greatly disappointing, and he had wanted to test out his powers. Then Ace had appeared. Oh, he had feigned witness, begged for mercy, and then proceeded to beat Ace up, defeating the Fire Logia user. Personally, Teach knew that he wouldn't have been able to do so if he hadn't got Ace riled up about his little brother, but hey, at least Ace was in his hands. So he struck gold and took Crocodile's spot as a warlord, and was he ever grateful of the chance to get some more powerful crewmates. He had been heading away from Impel Down when the news arrived. Of Fire Fist disappearing in transit. A bit confused, he had asked to listen to the broadcasts, and was subsequently rewarded with a variety of information he knew wasn't in his favor. Whitebeard allies disappearing. How strange, to not cover for the old man's back like that. And Whitebeard retreating himself. Throughout the years that Teach had spent with him, Whitebeard hadn't even retreated once. What was the sudden cause for the change in the man's behavior? Teach told his crew to make double time towards Marineford, eager to get his hands on the old man's power at his weakest. He wiretapped into Marine communications, and was quite confused by the news he had received. When he heard that Straw Hat was found and sent to be executed, he shrugged, because he no longer had a need for the warlord status and Straw Hat wasn't particularly important to him at that moment. Then, Ace had destroyed the platform, and Teach wondered how dumb could the Whitebeard pirates be. If Ace had escaped, he should have gotten his ship out of there first, saving the lives of the majority of his crew rather than nobly trying to get his brother in front of all the Marines in opposition against him. Finally, they had arrived at Marineford. Teach ordered his men to distract the Whitebeard pirates, and went in for the kill, because Whitebeard's power was so useful. I mean, earthquakes and tremors. That could be just what he needed to conquer the Grand Line. By threatening the Marines with it, he would be able to make his way through Whitebeard's territories with little opposition, and thus become an emperor. That was when things grew even more unpredictable. He plays with Ace, riling him up. He has always noticed that when Ace grew hot-blooded, his movements became slower, and cackled as Ace sent his most powerful attack at him. Good. The more Ace uses these attacks, the more tired he became. Then that very useful Fire Logia could be added to his own collection of devil fruits. Something smacked on his head, and he fled, cursing. What was that? Oh, it was the newbie who had refused to be Whitebeard's son. He had already broken Ace's records of several weeks, though he hadn't tried to kill Whitebeard with his long-standing opposition to join another family. Teach couldn't understand the boy. Why help a crew that you aren't a member of? This newbie was truly a mystery. Don't touch Ace. The Wanderer barks out, and Teach recognizes the determined glint in his eye. There was something behind that, something stronger. Something protective. The Wanderer lunges at him, and Teach is forced to go on the defensive as he recalls that the newbie specializes in hockey attacks. Damn, one thing he couldn't really defend against. Blackbeard gets a blow on his face, and curses as he decides to distract the man by using Black Hole on some surrounding rubble. Then a lucky blow sends him flying into something else that was flying. It's you. It's the shitty Admiral. Shit. Kizaru upturns his nose before using hockey to kick himself away. Bastard. Teach could feel a bruise forming from the enhanced Soru that the Admiral just gave him. Pops. Akainu gets one fortunate blow through Whitebeard. It looks serious enough because Teach could see a hole going through him. That would definitely make his goal of obtaining One Piece easier. He proceeds to add more chaos into the battle, attacking some of the scum he once called crewmates. He had always been mocked, from his bad teeth to his laugh to even his girth. No more insults from them. Straw Hat was trying to defend the ship, Well, let's see about that. Then a whirlwind forms right in front of the ship, throwing whatever he was aiming right back at him. The battle only gets worse. First, Shanks arrives at the scene, stopping the war. While Teach is trying to get his crew to retreat, a ship crashes right into the middle of the field, and his crew separate as the cannons on the wall surrounding them continue to bombard his crew directly. What bad luck. Then because the Marines were away, and the red-haired pirates are above their weight class having not fought a battle, the Marines focus on them. He furiously hisses as the thought of having his loyal men, his tools to get to Raftel are chased down and captured, and only he and his original crew were able to escape uninjured. He couldn't care less about the men he had used his Shichibukai position to obtain. If they lived, then it was their destiny to rejoin his crew. If not then, well, he could find other scoundrels of the sea. Then, Doc Q comes up with a brilliant suggestion. The main boat of the Whitebeard pirates were the only set more weakened by Marineford than they were. Furthermore, the newbie who is probably the only person in the ship that Teach couldn't estimate the power level of, and he's been carried off by flying ship. So, onto Whitebeard. Then something nudges his ship off course, just when Whitebeard is within firing reach. Teach, what do you think you are doing? Oh dear, it's the newbie. Looks like he's back here for more. If he were to die today, so be it. If he were to live on, then it would further confirm his belief that he was meant to get One Piece. Goku knows he is about to die today. If he were to live on, then so be it. Elephant gun. He increases the size of the waves that answer to his command, sending the Blackbeard pirates tumbling over themselves in order to right the ship. But Teach is moving forward, dissolved into his own dark flames and heading straight for the infirmary. The Whitebeard pirates had been settling, had been exhausted. They're in no shape to fight, and Goku knows this as much as he knows the fact that he will expire soon. So instead of trying to attack the Blackbeard pirates, he uses his power to unleash a tidal wave that sweeps the Moby Dick away from the Blackbeard ship further, before entrapping both he and the Blackbeard pirates in a watery prison. This has to be finished. Teach mustn't be allowed to continue to fulfill his dreams, because his existence itself guaranteed the events that led to the end of the world as he knew it. He roars a battle cry as he charges, much like his foolhardy younger self. With one kick, he splits the Blackbeard ship apart, causing the remaining crew to fall into the sea.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Teach cries a word of alarm as he dashes to rescue his crew. 30 minutes remain, D. He nods in silent reply. Yes, he knows he doesn't have much time left. So he works at making sure that the Blackbeard pirates are finished at a force. One whop, Doc Q falls down, explosive apples no longer able to be used. 2 whops, Lafitte falls, spine rendered broken. 3 whops, Van Auger can no longer see his scope. He doesn't check to see if they were killing blows. So long as their dreams were disrupted, unable to be fulfilled, then he considers it his win. Jesus Burgess tries to flee, but the watery prison holds firm, and he is buried under the waves. Shiryu strikes him. He is after all, an excellent swordsman. Goku should have noticed him coming, but he is distracted with making sure that the other Blackbeard crew members can no longer stand. Teach seizes the opportunity to wrap his flames around him. The Whitebeard pirates are coming back, yelling at him, mobilizing their existing forces. What are you thinking? He could hear Marco shouting at him. Are you insane? No, I'm not, Marco. I'm just so very tired. Goku, hang on, we're going to rescue you. Haruta, who's always been a bit jealous of him, could be heard shouting out as the Whitebeard commanders tries to raise their crew's morale for one last battle. Haruta, thank you for your vote of confidence. But I can't be saved. Not this time. But Goku wasn't known as the Pirate King without having had his plan thought through with his allies. Protecting an eager crew from hindering his battle is a strategy he had the misfortune of practicing numerous times to his regret. He has already been rescued too many times at the cost of his crew's, his Nakama's lives. He wouldn't allow it to occur any further. He paused, before sending a trail of his power towards the Moby Dick, one destination in particular. The Moby Dick lurches, before the waves throw them in the opposite direction. Unlike his time, the majority of the ships were driven by the wind, and even if they were in the Grand Line, he still could call the shots in terms of the direction of the waves. It is a power that he had never asked for, but was given at too high a cost. 15 minutes left, bearer of the D. His own crew is heading towards him. He uses the remaining energy he has left, to throw up another wave. This one won't stop them from reaching, because Nami has greater control over the weather than he could ever hope to, even with the unnatural powers he possesses, but it would be able to stop them from reaching from the battlegrounds. He sucks in a deep breath. Time for his last speech. You don't get it, do you? The Pirate King threw his head back and laughed, an empty hollow sound that felt like his insides were being ripped and torn at the molecular level. Even if you were to encircle the Grand Line 20 times, you still wouldn't be able to conquer it. He says, thrusting out his chest. Because I will never allow you to do it. What am I saying? As if Teach could ever find One Piece on his own. You think I could come up with this on my own? It's been 50 years. He exhaled heavily, raising both of his hands. I've had plenty of time to readjust the world order. It's not just your own skills that will save you this time, Teach. In 2 years' time, Raftful would be open for the taking, and my allies are the ones who will open it. You'll never be able to reach One Piece. That was what I made the trade for. Ha 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 ha. The sky exploded, clouds dissipating as water poured into the sky, showering those watching as it formed the words, "Have fun searching for my treasure." It encapsulated him in his entirety, all that he ever thought to pass on to the next generation of pirates. And so it continues. Everyone, this is my signal. Hide yourself, show yourself only to the one you want as your king. And we shall meet once more. Boy, you have angered me for the last time. Teach roared as more of his darkness continued to engulf the Pirate King turned wanderer. The wanderer choked on his laughter, and ignored the incoming doom, turning to face the Whitebeard pirates. "Sorry for getting you involved in this, my friends." He then faced his own crew. Nami was weeping, while the rest of his crew solemnly watched the scene, knowing that his stubbornness would never allow them to help or appear to others for aid, even replacing himself with a dummy when they had not noticed. He knew that it was Robin who had read his mind, sending this speech throughout the world in recognition of his final wish. "Sorry, you will have to go along with my selfish requests. This is the last one." "Idiot," Nami cried, "of course we will help. That's what Nakama are for." "Thanks Nami. Thank you everyone for letting me be the Pirate King." As much he was able to, the wanderer bowed his head in appreciation, once towards the crew he had sailed with for several months, once towards his loyal crew. And once more towards the ocean which he loved since he was a boy, and even as he continued to sense his life force draining away. "This is really it for me," he hissed, feeling much of his body dissolving, but he really couldn't care less. "I wonder if this could be called a fixed point in that mystery cloth." Flash, setting off from Dawn Island, to the cheering of villagers. His first meeting with Kobe. His first crew member at Shell's town, who was locked up without his swords. Kokoyashi village, Nami crying as she wore his hat, while he went off to fight for her freedom. Barati, Sanji sobbing madly as he kowtowed towards his mentor in gratitude of the permission to reach his dreams of the All Blue. Flash, Usopp jumping off the docks at Water 7 after their fight about Mary. Robin yelling at them, telling them to take her to the sea with them at Eni's lobby. Frankie doing his familiar pose while naked, while waves crashed against the rubble much to the disgust at those present. Flash, Thriller bark, Brook playing his piano while everyone sang and danced to the tune of Bink's Sake. Oh how he wished to hear that tune again. Sabati, where he met Rayleigh and invaded the human auction house and fought with the Marines before Kuma separated the crew in order to rescue them. Kuja Island, where Hancock and her sisters lived. Flash, Impel Down, where he fought back-to-back with Bentham. Marineford, where he told Whitebeard Awesome that he was going to rescue Ace no matter what. Ace using his body to shield himself from the fist of magma plunging through his gut. Flash, Jinbei telling him not to let his vision be restricted by his past, to move on after Ace's death. Flash, Shirahoshi pleading for him to stop destroying Noah. Oh, if only he had known what Noah really was. But does it really matter? Flash, Punk Hazard, and Terao and him becoming allies friends. Dressrosa, where Rebecca's only wish to live with her father drove her to become a gladiator and he met Sabo, his long-lost brother, and there was that Straw Hat Grand Fleet that he swears he was fooled into even to the end because who puts a feast so that he can't argue against it anyway. I really had a fun journey, didn't I? And I met so many people, made so many friends, had so many nakama. And even after I went into the past, I collected even more acquaintances. Roger and the crew of the Oro Jackson, Shanks was so small. Rayleigh being even more of an awesome old guy. Thatch, who loved food and guarded his kitchen, not that Luffy had stolen from it, before. Sanji shouldn't put locks on the fridge. Marco, who's kinda like a mother hen, overprotective but cool at the same time. And he got to meet Ace again. Thank you everyone for loving me, Luffy echoed his brother's words with a slight twinge of irony. Huh, so it did get said in the end, even as the speaker changed to follow the new timeline. Thank you for making this journey with me, guys. I'll see you on the other side. On to the next adventure. The darkness exploded, raining all the objects that Teach's darkness had swallowed, along with a spray of seawater. Luffy, Goku you idiot, both those who had known him before and after cried as they watched his ragged cloak fall into the sea. Aces felt his heart fall into his stomach. Luffy, his own brother, turning into someone like that. How much did you hurt in order to do that to yourself? His still alive baby brother watched silently, rubbing the ribbon of his straw hat. Meanwhile, Sabo had crept his arms around the both of them, trying to comfort the two even as he watched a guy he had known for both a childhood and only a short while pass on to the next world. Ace, Luffy finally said, turning towards him. I don't want to become like that. Ace scrutinized the somber expression on Luffy's face. His crybaby, always cheerful brother should never have to wear that expression on his face. Ace's every brotherly instinct screamed at him as he rubbed circles into his brother's back, wanting to dissuade his brother, to say that Ace would never allow it to happen to him. But did he have the power to do so? First Impel Down and his brother rushing to help him escape only to end up nearly executed himself, then Marineford and the Whitebeard's retreat, and now this, where the Whitebeard pirates were forced away in order to be protected from a person who was originally part of their crew. They couldn't defend themselves, and Luffy, no Goku, because Ace never wants to see his brother with such weary eyes, even if he had to pound sense into him with his fists, had taken it upon himself to protect a crew he had only sailed with for a few months. Ace clenched his fist. Fine. If he wasn't able to protect himself, then there was only one thing to do. Become stronger, become strong enough so that they won't break their promise, and both, no all three were able to live their lives with no regrets like Goku had. Judging by the looks on Sabo's face, it was clear that he had the same thoughts. Ace came to a decision, one that he should done so upon returning to the Moby Dick. Luffy, let's exchange Sakazuki once more. Luffy's eyes widened, before nodding. Ace turned and dashed towards the deserted kitchen, returning with a bottle of East Blue sake and 3 red cups. Did you know, you guys? Luffy said as he poured out into his cup, before passing it over to Sabo. If you exchange drinks, Sabo said as he filled his own cup, before returning the bottle to Ace. Then you can become brothers. Ace said as he filled the remaining cup. As pirates, and Revolutionary Army members, Sabo hastily added, we will not be able to end up on the same crew. But the bond of brotherhood we share will never die, no matter where we are. Ace leveled a glance towards Sabo, who grinned as he raised his cup in acknowledgement of the 10 years he had spent away from them. Or what we do, this is one bond we can never break. As one, they pushed their cups together, letting the alcohol spurt over their arms. From yesteryear to today to our deaths, we are brothers. Downing their cups in one gulp, they slammed the cups down. No excuses, no regrets, freedom. Behind the trio, Marco felt a smirk crawl over his face. The Whitebeard pirates had been shocked, and both he and Thatch had felt tears well up as they watched the Wanderer die with a smile on his face. But the display of brotherhood right on the deck itself seemed to uplift the spirit of the Whitebeard pirates, and he could hear various catcalls and cheers as various members decided to spontaneously vow eternal brotherhood as well. Teach had slunk off. Marco didn't think that their chances of killing off Teach were good, seeing how Teach had defeated Ace, had defeated them, had escaped Marineford with nary a scratch. But that didn't matter anymore. He felt Thatch wrap his arm around his shoulder, his warm weight a pleasant balm to the worries Marco had felt. Pops was still unconscious, but what the Wanderer had done must have worked, because all of his sisters were telling him that yes, Pops was going to live past this and wake up after he healed somewhat. Then all of them would mourn the brothers they had lost at Marineford and during their battle with Teach, and they would welcome the new era with their father. They were going to live as freely as they could. No regrets. Chapter 15, Childhood. Catch those dine and dashers. Luffy hurriedly woofs down his Kyushu ramen as Ace deftly snatches Sabo's second bowl to help him finish. Once the owner turns to collect their bill, suddenly made aware by her competitor's employees' yells, the trio are long gone, with only a note left behind. The note in question, written in a childish scrawl, put it on my treasure tab. The future Pirate King. The cashier looked towards the 15 bowls on the innermost lane, where the note was found. Then, the second, with 2 bowls left finished. The third, closest to the doorway, 12. All seats were bereft of paying customers. Those brats. She screams at one of her waitresses to look after the shop, before running off in pursuit of the trio which had her shop for free. Come on, we have to get the reporters here. Sabo cries as he reaches the bell first. He deftly undoes the tight rope that secures the bell, causing it the clapper to be free of its restraints. Ace paused, turning to the currently being demolished execution platform. In his mind, he remembers his brother on the platform, and how close he was to being on it too. Luffy had came up with this, he recalled. He had wanted to get his news out to his friends. Therefore, as good elder brothers that they were, Sabo and Ace had agreed without knowing its exact details. Both had later regretted that they hadn't done so, because returning to the place of their near deaths is terrifying. So many people had died. So many people could have died as well. There's so much to living, Ace has found. Because there are people who love him, Ace thinks that some part of his question had been solved. Because there are people willing to die for him, Ace wants to continue living on, not just purely surviving. With one jerk, he swings the rope, and the clapper hits the bell, causing the sound to reverberate throughout the square. Another, and a crowd begins to gather around them. Why is the bell being rung? He hears. What are these hooligans trying to do? 6 more times, he swings his arms and 6 more bellows vibrate through the air. Then he pauses, before handing it over to Luffy. Luffy knows that he has to get this message out. Because he doesn't want to die so sadly like Ace's crewmate, thanking them for loving him, while making them mourn for him. He would never let his friends become so painful like that. The thing is, he could have done so. When he was up at the execution platform, gazing down at below, he had remembered his nakama, and apologized to them for dying like that. Jinbei had spoken to him later, telling him what his nakama might have viewed it. You scare us, Luffy. We thought you were about to die. I was. But have you become Pirate King yet? No. But if I was going to die, I was going to say my last goodbyes to them first. Jinbei had grown thoughtful, while Rayleigh had sat there, with a widening smile on his wrinkly face. There was something glittering in his eyes, but when Luffy had asked him later, Rayleigh scratched behind his ears and said, "You remind me of someone." That was what Rayleigh had explained his offer of hockey training. Luffy didn't know what it was, and Ace didn't exactly give clear instructions either. Conqueror's hockey, aim all of your anger at one person. Observation hockey, something lights up in the distance, and that will be your target. Armament hockey, never used it. Ask someone else. After peering over his shoulder, Ace's crewmate with the big hair like Frankie had turned and thwacked Ace heavily on the shoulder, saying, "How the hell is he supposed to interpret that?" Meanwhile, Rayleigh had taken a look at it, shaken his head, and proceeded to ask Ace if he wanted to train under him too. Ace had firmly rejected the full training, but did promise to ask for 6 months' leave from his duty as 2nd Division commander when he had finished training Luffy. There had been a certain scary glint in Rayleigh's eyes after that, and Sabo claimed that he had caught sight of some of Rayleigh's lesson plans for Ace. Apparently, it had involved asking Ace to use Conqueror's Haki on some Sea Kings while crossing the Calm Belt. 5 times each way, and throwing sea water at him the whole time. Luffy didn't know why Sabo had given him pitying looks after that. Sabo said 8 rings. Right then, Luffy raised his arms, and pulled at the rope sideways. 8 times, for each nakama he said goodbye to. Once he had finished ringing the bell, he had turned to face the crowd, jumping off the platform. Sabo went to his left, while Ace crouched down and leapt between the two of them. So the number of brats I have to teach a lesson has once again increased to 3, huh? There was the resounding noise of the cracking of knuckles. As one, a cold shiver ran down their spines. There was only one voice who could have uttered that. Wasn't he on Sabayati? Sabo whimpered as they walked faster. What do you think? Of course he's not. Ace started to jog. Gramps is here. Gramps is here. Luffy could practically hear Garp's presence coming right behind them. Run. All 3 broke into a sprint, as they ran towards their getaway ride. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Garp whooped as he sent his fist flying. It hit Luffy squarely on the top of his head, causing him to cry out in pain. Meanwhile, a flash reminded them of the reporters who had gathered because of the bell. I hope this works, Luffy. Ace screams as they dashed across a road in the middle of repair works. Because I will kill you for letting us be on the same island as the old geezer, let alone within punching distance. Quote, oh that's how it is it? Ace refused to turn his head, as a hot and heavy breath went past his neck. Let's have another fist of love. No, do you think we lost him? Sabo says, huffing as they finally reach the boat where Rayleigh has already arrived from the news office. Yeah, I think so. Ace wheezed as he settled down into the small raft. We need to get out of here fast. Luffy repeats the word continuously as he gazes around, searching the scene. Who thought this up? The Dark King snarled as all 3 of them started rowing while Rayleigh unfurled the sails. Apparently, he felt the same about their current pursuer, and was just as eager to get moving as the trio. Well, they couldn't blame him, their fear of the man was well founded, but his was extended over more than 30 years. Weren't you the one who planned this? Sabo thought, remembering Rayleigh's words. If they read the article, then they'll understand. The fact that it's quite unlike you is in itself the key. You did have one companion who didn't seem particularly quick on the uptake. But I'm sure he'll figure it out. Sabo and Fire Fist Ace, age 20. Straw Hat Luffy, biological age 17, mental age 5. Rayleigh, age unknown. R. Like hell I would tell it to you, Pipsqueaks. Monkey D. Garp, Vice Admiral, age 67. Mental age, 7. Come back boys. Garp has walked through approximately 3 walls of defense posts, and sent 2 cannonballs through the yachts that the boys had initially came in. As far as Marineford HQ went, this is his 2nd round of destruction after Marineford, and his 23rd round since he had been promoted to Vice Admiral. The reason? His 3 idiot grandsons had paid him a visit. One that Garp was quite eager to repay in kind. Gramps alert. Luffy's voice alerted them to the moving threat. Ace had already gotten hold of the Logia-powered engine, and soon they are speeding their way out of Marineford. Meanwhile, Garp, who had been banned from boarding marine ships in pursuit of criminals after the 17th time taking Sengoku's ride in order to fight Roger, looks on the fleeing boat with awkward pride in his chest. I will catch you. Like hell. Ace shoots back from a distance. See you, Gramps. The 3 boys merrily sail off to safety, leaving behind approximately 19 reporters interrogating the hundreds of eyewitnesses that had viewed the vandalism of Marine HQ. I see. Sengoku crosses his arms. So you mean to tell me that your 3 grandsons had invaded Marineford by pretending to be builders? One finger was raised up. Then they had dined and dashed at 3 different restaurants, with their bill amounting to a week's worth of meals for a sloop. Another finger went up, and they had rung the Ox bell 16 times in a row, which is in the central plaza in the center of Marineford. And you couldn't catch them. He slammed both hands against the table, causing Kobe to wince. The invasion of Marineford hadn't been expected, and their reckless actions had outraged the higher-ups, seeing it as a challenge to them. While Kobe could understand where they are coming from, he personally thought that the fleet admiral was being too highly strung about it. Upon reflection, Kobe watched Sengoku carefully. It seemed that the fleet admiral was more relaxed than before. He would have usually continued in a long spiel about justice and such for 2 hours. But that was a reprimand, not a scolding. What had happened on Sabayati a few days ago with Vice Admiral Garp? Wahahaha. They had Rayleigh backing them up. I need more support if I were to actually get them. Garp replied, shrugging his shoulders. Kobe could see the veins on Sengoku's forehead twitch in response. That's because you wreck every ship that you're on without any question. Furthermore, you're the one WHO caused the most damage in this case. Kobe winced again, remembering the various Garp-shaped holes that had remained on the wooden walls. Garp had been unusually persistent in carrying out his duties, and had broken oh so many walls. Why had he been apprenticed to him again? Oh yes, Luffy. Like grandson, like grandfather apparently. He inspected the bounty photo, now updated after the War of the Best. In it, he had A.D. written on his right forearm, while pointing 2 fingers and a thumbs up. On his left hand, he had shot up A.V. sign while Y was written instead. Die. What did that mean? I understand, Captain. Zoro smirked as Perona removed the newspaper with a huff. Die. 3D2Y. Zoro corrected her as he took out Rayleigh's Vivre card. We were supposed to meet up in 3 days at a certain location, well you know how that turned out. He whisked the paper back into his shirt. He's using 3 fingers to imply 3, while 2 fingers and the Y implies that we would meet up in 2 years' time. But how did you know that it was meant for you? Zoro sighed, before taking out the bounty poster. Look here, we didn't need to go in the first place. Both Sabo and Ace screamed at Rayleigh as Luffy scratched his head. Of course we had to. Sabayati Archipelago, 2 years later. Luffy scratched his head. It's quite obvious, isn't it? Like hell it's not. Ace screamed with shark teeth, while Sabo pounced onto Luffy, on the verge of wringing his neck. Exactly, which was why I had been down at the printing office. Rayleigh took out the newest bounty poster of Luffy. 3 days, 2 years. And in his teeth. Wait, Sabayati, Ace said in a dead-toned voice. In other words, all we had to do was make enough of a ruckus, so that you could have the easy job of sneaking into the News Coup building. Well, in a sense, we didn't. Sabo said, scratching his chin. Because of the Ox Bell. What's with the big bell? Luffy asks. They ring it 16 times a year. 8 times to end the old year, 8 times to bring in the new. Rayleigh hummed in slight delight. 8 times for the new, huh? He says, staring at what could be his captain's successor. Then he turned towards Ace. And 8 times for the old. Shut your trap right now, geezer. Both Rayleigh and Ace stared venomously into each other, each unwilling to give way. Hot-headed, stubborn fool. Shitty old manipulative bastard. Daddy issues brat. Ace appeared to turn red with rage, his fingers bursting into fire. Luffy, let's move away from here. Sabo hurriedly edged Luffy away from the ensuing struggle for dominance. Already, he could feel waves of conqueror's haki from the two, which usually preceded an incoming fight between the Pirate King's son and his first mate. But I don't get it. Luffy said, scratching his head. What's so special about the big bell? Well, this is the meaning of the 16 chimes. However, it is quite evidently out of season. In other words, the sounding of the 16 chimes can be interpreted as a tribute to the ending of one age, and the beginning of a new. So he's trying to say, I'll create the new age myself, or something, is he? Garp said, scratching his head. Didn't know that my stupid grandson could think of that. It's probably the Dark King's idea. The whole bar was in full party mode, with streamers decked out over the counter, while the picture taken from the Grand Line Times had been proudly framed and nailed onto the wall along with all of Luffy and Ace's other bounty photographs. In it, Sabo was running at the left, with Ace in the center. Luffy was the only one wearing a happy grin, flashing a V with his left hand. In the background, was Garp chasing madly and throwing cannonballs after them. Unlike their youngest brother, both Sabo and Ace wore looks of full-fledged shock and terror as they tried to escape their adoptive grandfather. Youngsters invade Marineford under repair, the headlines screamed. Ox Bell rung 16 times. Already, multiple copies of the Grand Line Times had been circulated throughout the village, as people talked about the people featured in the front page of the newspaper. Those brats. Whoop Slap slammed his palm onto his forehead. What did they think they were doing, returning and creating chaos once more? Meanwhile, both Dayton and her group of bandits had been sobbing madly as they pored over the opened newspaper. They had mourned Sabo's death. Now, there was a new entry in the journal tentatively titled the ASL Trilogy. The bandits hadn't expected the book to be completed. But now that they know that Sabo and Ace and Luffy were alive and together, they had carefully pasted the article into their journal. Makino tenderly smiled as she poured out another celebratory drink to Garp. Her boys were back together, and nothing could be more perfect. Gararara. Pops heartily laughed as he stared at the front cover picture. Ace looks like he's doing well. All of his commanders had been alerted when he finally woke up 2 days after the battle. Marco was the one responsible for telling him the news of Goku passing on, and Pops had grown silent for a few minutes before asking for the Grand Line Times, to keep up with the rest of the world while he was asleep. It was then when Thatch and Haruto walked in, laughing at something, and had turned over the newspaper when asked. Now, nearly all of the division commanders were gathered around them as Pops found his son clearly having the time of his life. Yeah, Marco says, scratching his head. He didn't even tell us that he was going to attempt a stunt like this with Straw Hat. Ace had asked for leave, saying that he had to meet up with his family, have a conversation or something. Well, Marco definitely didn't expect for Ace to go back to Marineford. Or to ring the Ox Bell. Did they know what they were trying to pull? Probably not. It looks like the only one who can strike fear into our ace's heart is gone. Thatch pointed out one of the shorter columns on the Grand Line Times. Look, Garp the Fist, Sengoku the Buddha set to retire in a year. Quote, Haruta snatches the paper from him, scanning it. Why would these two old fogies resign? It's not like they haven't weakened or anything. It's for Marineford. Marco pondered. Because Sengoku's operation didn't pan out as planned, he's resigning to apologize for his failure. However, the Marines are framing it as a retirement, in order to prevent morale from collapsing as they select a new leader. It's probably going to be from the admirals, right? Vista twirled his mustache and thought. Borsellino, Kuzan, Sakazuki, all were insane in their own way, and all three were dangerous to deal with, as evident in their previous battle. Kizaru's too easygoing, no way he'll ever accept. Curiel points out. So it's between Aokiji and Akainu. On one hand, Aokiji had the most devastating powers, because he had been the one stopping their fleet from retreating. On the other hand, Akainu had been the greater threat to them. Marco sighed EYD Pops, who was focused in thought. His sisters had made the division commanders all swear not to rile up Pops too bad, so they've been extra careful with their words such that the wound wouldn't reopen. While the wound could have been devastating, having struck between his lungs and below his heart and missing his stomach by a few centimeters, it seemed that the dash of water that had flown through the prison made by Goku had reached the infirmary, and had did something, Marco wasn't sure. It seemed to cover the open wound, causing it to heal faster than what the nurses had predicted. Marco didn't know what to think about Goku. They had only known each other for several months, and for many of the division commanders on separate ships, their meeting about Marineford was the first time he had been seen. Haruta had grown tetchy in his presence, while Namor had levied a suspicious look at the intruder, but somehow Goku had managed to etch his presence into their lives, convincing them of his experience in the area. Marco didn't want to know why Goku had known Marineford this well. Then Goku had jumped in at Marineford, knocked out Pops and sent them all on their merry way away while he alone held the retreat. Those who had gone ahead earlier were alarmed at the sight of their Pops, but once they had been satisfied with the fact that their Pops had been given to the best of hands, all of them were asking about Goku, who had made a name for himself by going against Kizaru and Akainu. The news special had came out only a day after the actual event. Apparently, Goku's own crew had popped by for a visit, wreaked havoc, and took their wanderer with them. Marco was still busy with dealing with their losses and contact with their allies as first mate, so it was Jozu and Thatch who kept track of whatever was going on in the ship while Ace slept off the exhaustion of a spell in Impel Down, a near execution and rescuing his brother had caused. They had stopped at King's Atoll, burying their dead and observing a day of mourning for them. For some reason, there appeared to be an empty spot where no one was willing to walk past. When Marco had went there in curiosity, he suddenly saw two graves, one much larger than the other and flying their flag. He peered to focus on the names written on the headstones. And the vision vanished, as if it never existed in the first place. Ace had woken up by then, and he and his two adopted brothers had stood at that spot, laying flowers on it. When asked, he had pointed to Luffy, saying that it was his idea. Luffy had no recollection of doing such a thing, but Sabo had supported Ace's statement. On their way back from King's Atoll when they were about to head towards the New World, the whole incident with Teach occurred. All of the Moby Dick ships were sent away, winds blowing them to the opposite direction despite the coaxing of the helmsman, while the navigators found that the waves were moving strangely, akin to something controlling them. Marco and Thatch had walked in shock and horror as from the sea surfaced two globules of water. Then, the water continued to gather upon itself, until finally, it had formed a person. Goku, he shouted, but their wanderer had not even looked at them, proceeding to head towards Blackbeard's ship. When the navigators had finally managed to steer them towards Goku, it was as though the weather itself was acting against them, and they were ducking for cover as rain splashed down on them from a concentrated cloud. Some of them had even said that the weather was so sudden it didn't match Paradise's standards. Goku had smiled when he was finally swallowed up by Teach's darkness, and Marco was made aware that the first time he had encountered Teach in battle, he had been able to avoid Teach's powers. Why had he not done so now? His mouth grew dry at the thought of Goku's last words. Thank you all for loving me. The words unexpectedly resonated within him, telling him that something had been righted where it was once wrong, but Marco didn't see anything right about that. After all, even as they had protected their allies, 73 of their brothers who had been tasked with protecting their retreat had died at Marineford, while their allies had left unscathed. Marco felt that the death toll could have been higher. Somehow, there was an uneasy feeling in his chest when he had seen the waves sweeping them away from harm. Unlike pop tsunamis, the waves had been gentle, non-malicious, and felt like someone had been in total control over them. Was Goku the reason behind that, even as he fought the hardest of their opponents at the same time? Thatch had once told him that Goku's eyes were old. He himself had said that he had lost all of his crew members. Marco recalled the conversation that he had with Whitebeard about their Wanderer's guilt complex. Hadn't they been enough to carry on? Why had the Wanderer chose to protect them? And he recalled the venom that Goku had spat in every of his encounters with Teach. "Don't touch Ace. What do you think you're doing?" They had been filled with loathing and hatred. Goku's last-ditch effort didn't succeed in the end, and Marco's estimations of their chances had rung true when he heard from King Du and Rikuyo how they had been defeated, despite having been on a branch ship with enough firepower to down a marine base. Apparently, numbers didn't matter when Teach had utilized his powers of darkness. If they had to take on the new age, they would have to be stronger. Marco never thought Pops as being infallible, but Teach had made Marco worried. The Whitebeard pirates haven't always been the most moral, but they were still fairly decent for a pirate crew as compared to say some of the Shichibukai. Ace had told them that Rayleigh was going to train his brother and later him. When asked, Rayleigh had only shrugged, saying that Ace had all three kinds of haki, but no knowledge how to use them because he was a natural, especially with Conqueror's haki. Marco hadn't liked the look in his eye, and warned that Ace was theirs. Rayleigh wasn't going to snatch him away from them, even if he was Roger's son. Rayleigh had leveled a stare at him. He then proceeded to say that if he had known that Roger had a son in the first place, he wouldn't have left Ace alone. Apparently, if they couldn't even rescue Ace from impel down, then it was Rayleigh's duty to look after him, because Roger was his captain, and Ace was his son, and he would sooner drown than let his captain down. Then you're just like the Marines. Ace is Ace. He isn't his father's son as well. Marco shouted back, remembering the murmurs that had broke out when Ace had admitted to being Roger's son after Sengoku had revealed his parentage to the world. He acted as though it didn't concern him, but Luffy and Sabo had looked at each other, exchanging unspoken words, before lifting a protesting Ace onto their shoulders and jumped onto a friendly island when some of his brothers had talked about how Ace was the enemy's son. All 15 remaining division commanders were working on deck, trying to assure their men and their allies that Ace never knew his father and wasn't his father's son when a proclamation had been made one day later. In the announcements page, wrote, "The Pirate King has now passed on. The war for One Piece has begun. Prepare yourselves for Raftel." It was signed by both the Pirate King's crew, the Self-Defense Force, as well as the Revolutionary Army. A greater buzz had broke out in the underworld, as people tried to figure out the intent of the message. Obviously, it couldn't refer to Roger, because the Roger pirates had long since split up and it would have been issued right after Roger's death, and not 22 years later. Furthermore, the Revolutionary Army didn't exist at the time of Roger's execution, at least at the scale it was now. While there was talk of a self-defense force that existed, very little was known about the vigilante group. It grew to the extent that the shock of Ace's real parentage was but a mere speck as compared to the huge news that an island had appeared on the maps of the Grand Line, marked Raftel. But when spies had been sent forth, no island had been reported where the maps had indicated. It was as though the island had never existed, yet it was still there where no cartographer had written. So when Ace, Sabo, another of Ace's brothers, at least he wasn't a black hole, and Luffy had made their way back to the ship off the uninhabited island, it was with great puzzlement and befuddlement as they had read of the news announcement. Sabo had finished his conversation with his friends, before telling them that the Revolutionary Army was also confused about the message and wanted more details as well from the ground. Only Ace had a different response. He paled, fingering the announcement, and shut himself in the room for an hour. He had left, before proceeding to say something that would always warm Marco's heart whenever he thought about it. "I don't care if the whole world refuses to accept me. They can hate me all they like. I'll prove I'm better than them all. I won't run from anybody. I'll never lose. I don't care if they end up terrified of me. I'm going to make sure that the whole world knows my name." Really, Marco was this close to being moved. Thatch and Izo were long gone, sobbing tears of delight, while Jozu and Curiel had thumped Ace eagerly on the chest. Then Luffy utterly destroyed the atmosphere by saying, "I'll become Pirate King." Marco face-palmed at that. Did he not notice whose ship he was currently freeloading on? If it wasn't clear who had eyes on the throne, that did it. Ace had catcalled, saying that he'll rather Whitebeard be his king instead, while Sabo had palmed his face. The Whitebeard pirates in the meanwhile had teased Luffy, calling him, "cheeky brat," and that was the end of that discussion among their crew as various ways of getting their own back were sought and immediately foiled by the combined efforts of the trio. They had almost come to blows when Luffy, Ace's brother, had came in. With a serious tone, he said, "Ace is my brother. If he weren't there, then I wouldn't be here either." Then, he had gone off to pester the Kitchens and Thatch, who by this time did not feel a slight twinge of guilt when he had kicked out the black hole on legs within 3 seconds of finding him for the 17th time. Both of them stared at each other as several clanging sounds broke out, while Thatch's angry voice roared at the irrepressible rubber boy for thieving from the kitchen once again. Then they collapsed into laughter. "You won't have to worry about me taking Ace away." Rayleigh was the first to speak. "Because I've already placed my bet on someone else instead. He sure is a stupid cheeky little youngster, isn't he?" Marco replied, rubbing his head. "Goku, was this the person you were waiting for until you chose to use your remaining power for us instead?" Marco thought as he closed his eyes. If Luffy was the Pirate King, then well, he won't be surprised if Fishman Island rose from the sea then. Is Princess Shirahoshi okay? She heard the guards outside say. She didn't know how restrictive her life was back then. Shirahoshi looked at the four corners of her bedroom, while Megalo continued to swim around and round her bedroom. It was an act of stress, but it was also an act of frustration. He too had been cooped up for too long. When the Whitebeard pirates had passed by, her Luffy-sama had gave her memories of the other time, and Shirahoshi couldn't help but compare this world. Fishman Island was so peaceful. There wasn't a threat of sanctions by the world government, and they had benefited from the claiming of their island by Whitebeard himself. The Big Mom pirates had been here after Jinbei's resignation and the announcement of Luffy's brother's execution, but after seeing that Whitebeard was still alive and therefore powerful enough, they retreated back. Shirahoshi knew the moment it had arrived, that her savior had died. She had wept inconsolably in her room for 3 days, barely touching any food as she recalled each and every memory that she had of Luffy. From chancing upon her in her own bedroom, to squeezing her into Megalo that she could pay her respects to mother. To kicking Vanderdecken's axe, to stopping her father from being executed. And he had even gone against Noah, the boat that was undefeatable in order to save Fishman Island. Luffy had even gone against Big Mom when they had failed to produce the sweets on time. The straw hats had been brought from the surface by Jinbei, and quickly gained popularity, as hero hats. Jinbei had apologized to her for not being able to get one large enough for her, but Shirahoshi hadn't minded because it was good enough that Luffy and his crew had promised to return to her. Shirahoshi made a decision. She could wait for 2 years, continuing to be protected by her father and brothers and waiting for this time's Luffy to arrive. She could wait to be rescued. But she was one of the 20 guardians to Raftel, for a reason. She was Shirahoshi, Poseidon, the caller of sea kings, an aide to navigating Raftel's waters. With a nod, she steeled herself, all of her nerves bunched together in one. People shouldn't always rely on the captain. He had gotten so tired, and Shirahoshi couldn't do anything but watch as he faded and became so much less lively. The only people who succeed are those that help themselves, she thought, clenching her fist. But first, wah! She burst out, causing the worried guards to burst into the room as Megalo swam back in shock. Luffy, I won't be known to you as Crybaby Hoshi any longer, she thought furiously as her guards tried to comfort her. But please, let me be at your side the next time. I don't want to be useless to my chosen captain any longer. She would train her ability, she would be able to call upon sea kings larger than Fishman Island altogether. And she would enjoy the sunrise together with him. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Cursed by Jennifer Wilson. Chapter 16, Fallout. Flashback. There are always 4 things needed for a bar to survive. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. She says, tinkling with laughter. For a bar to survive, the first thing one must do is to get the wholesaler's approval. Doesn't the wholesaler have competition? He asks, because it's obvious to him that pirates could just as easily drop off their stolen cargo at the bar, rather than offering it at a wholesaler market which the pint-sized woman gets her best rum and gin from. Not if the bartender wants a steady supply. Mary replies. In business, it's best to have good relations with the wholesaler. Not many try to argue with him, because they would definitely lose out. She skips to her feet, and turns. He's the only one willing to buy at an acceptable price. The wholesaler proved to be an eccentric man. He told her to make a drink based on what she could tell of the wholesaler himself, even if it were the first time Mary had met him. With a smile, Mary had asked for whiskey, vermouth and bitters. She stirred 5 parts whiskey with 1 part vermouth, before adding a dash of the bitters. She stirred the drink with ice, and strained it into 2 cocktail glasses. Finally, she added a bright red, sweetened cherry, and presented it to both he and the wholesaler. It tasted slightly bitter, but sweet at the same time, he thought, while the wholesaler smacked his lips, closing his eyes in remembrance. A Manhattan, he pronounced, licking his lips. The wholesaler then carefully picked up a bottle, with the words whiskey inscribed onto the glass, and presented it to Mary. Something old for your bar, then. He says. My best treasure. Made 200 years ago. How about that? The bottle seemed old and worn, but the way the old man treated made it seemed as though it was made of crystal rather than glass, and the old words seemed chiseled since the time it was made. He eyed Mary, who was now looking at the glass with a skeptical glance. No, she shook her head. I'm afraid I can't accept this. Why not? The old man said, pushing the bottle right into her face. It's old. Should be nice to put on display. Nope, she says, handing over the bottle to him. Because the drills of 200 years ago weren't sharp enough to make such a thin cut. She points to the Y of the word. It's a fake, isn't it? For a moment, he thought the old man was going to blow his top. His face steadily grew redder, while he slammed his treasured glass down onto the table. Then, the old man started laughing. You're a smart one, I'll give you that. He says, patting at his bulging beer belly. Thought I could have fooled you with that. Ah, no. It just so happened I had read a book on wine manufacture in the past just 2 days ago, so I was fresh on the details of that era. Mary comments, scratching her head. That's what a bar owner needs though. He levels a glance at the two of them. A clear perception. Most would-be bar owners come here, because it's a hotspot for gatherings, and many would assume that their profits would be higher if they were to situate themselves near the red line. Their minds filled with dreams and expectations. However, they overestimate their earnings and buy up stuff in preparation of a roaring business, but bar owners too have to deal with the damage given out by the pirates and marines hanging around here. Shaki's rip-off bar is an oddity, but most of the time we barely have paying customers between the pirates and the actions of the celestial dragons. Something old is indeed a treasure, but it's not this bottle. It's a clear perception when dealing with customers in the store. He tosses her a casket full of bottles. Here, have that. It's a good collection to start with. Actually, I was hoping that you would introduce me to the person who creates these. She says, holding up the glass that the wholesaler was drinking from when they had met him. He peered at the cup, long since emptied with the ice melting under the strong heat of day. The ice. Oh, you'll have to see this old guy then. The wholesaler says as he brings out a den mushi. I'll make the introductions for you and give you his address. End flashback. He had learned many things that day. This woman was inspiring, and not just in the lessons she taught. He himself didn't know there was a purpose in life that could be derived from drink. At the start of his career, he had always been treated as if on edge, and even later on when he had found his friends, his life in the Revolutionary Army, they had still treated him as an oddball. Only Dragon treated him as if he were a normal person, and he had willingly fought with the Revolutionary Army for it. But now, he was caught adrift. He knew that he had been about to die, had been willing to do so, but he didn't understand why he did not. Oh, he understood the details of the operation he had gone through, but the fact was, he was still alive, his personality was intact, and everything was not as it should be. Bartholomew Kuma was here, and he did not understand why Vegapunk's operation had failed. The good doctor had tried to understand why, even taking him apart. Kuma didn't quite mind it. Really, he was only doing his job, rather than out of malicious intent, and Kuma could respect that, but the truth remained that Kuma had retained his mind even after the final operation was complete. It was boggling how the head of the Marines, science had failed in what appeared to be a life-changing experiment. Vegapunk was still investigating the experiment's outcome, and Kuma had came here to Sabayati, but he knew that he was still being watched by the Marines. There was no way that he could lead them to the Straw Hat's ship, especially since his usefulness to the Marines was still questionable. As a result, Kuma had gone to the remaining place that could ground him, that did not put his peers from the Revolutionary Army at risk. He had gone to Sabayati Archipelago's Mary's bar. Mary once told him that unlike a public house, a bartender's operations are mainly at night. So, her free hours were in the afternoon, and she served meals when requested. Kuma knew for a fact that Garp the Fist frequently dined here after the bar had closed for the night, and he had been careful to avoid the Marine officer by coming in during the day. Did you know? Mary had once told him. There are two people who would not tell on you. The doctor or pharmacist, because your health is their business alone. And the bartender, who observes client confidentiality because he has no need for the secrets of others. After all, they have secrets themselves. Mary was willing to listen to his secrets. The fact that her employee, a tall but slouching man who constantly slipped on the floor or knock over chairs when panicked, could erect soundproof barriers was quite convenient, as well as the fact that he didn't speak at all. Mary often lamented that his social skills were appalling, but he personally felt that the employee's silence helped to add to the bar's privacy. Next to him was another customer, seated also at the bar but 5 places away. He had a bandana tied around his head to keep his fringe off, while his colorful Hawaiian t-shirt was an eyesore as compared to the dark brown wood of the bar itself. He tapped his leg impatiently as he waited for his drink, while copying something down onto his notebooks. Here you go, Mary replied. Cocktail glass chilled beforehand, coating the inside with bitters. 60 milliliters of West Blue gin very well chilled, and garnished with lemon rinds. Stir lightly. Since we have a beautiful piece of ice, let's make this on the rocks. Enjoy your pink gin, sir. The other man smirked as he took a sip. Will you not consider my offer? He says, eyes on the tiny woman. You would be a tremendous help to my organization. I've abandoned the sea waves for good, sir. It's a pity, but no. The man raked his hands over his hair in a huff. You read the announcement in the papers, right? He's passed on. With the throne now empty, everyone would be fighting for it. So they were referring to the strange notice then. Kuma had no way of getting to the Revolutionary Army, not now when he was compromised, but the back of his neck tingled at probable intrigue. It was then that he was caught. The other man had looked at him sharply, and said, let's discuss this in a more private area. No. Mary petulantly put her hands on her hips. He's a friend. He won't hurt us. You are too naive, the other man scoffed. He's a pacifista. I'm quite surprised that you haven't tossed the machine away. Kuma knows that this is the wide opinion of him, but he has no reason to fight back. He is after all more machine than human, and it shows in the way that he no longer even orders a dish made by Mary. Or the way that his eyes scan for the identities of the man, but comes up blank. The man doesn't have a bounty poster, and thus he is not a pirate. You're not quite wrong, but not quite right either. To his surprise, Mary arches a brow. If you speak to him, you would find that he's retained his mind quite well after all. Quite right, Mary, he says, and he has the pleasure of seeing the man blanch in shock. How? Didn't Vegapunk, he says, pointing to Kuma, then the drink that he is holding, then Kuma again. Finally, his eyes land solely on Mary, who's now beaming with pride. You did something, didn't you? The other man glares at Mary. Kuma's overwhelmed with shock. Mary did something. When did that occur? How did a woman have access to Vegapunk's laboratory? How did she interfere with the experiment? How? Kuma finally says, looking at Mary at well. Mary fidges under the glares that both give her, before she relents. First, what could you tell me about this? She says, pointing at the pink gin the other man is holding. A pink gin, made of 1 part West Blue gin and chilled, this. No, not that, she says, and laughs. Who invented it? The other man purses his lips together. You planned this, didn't you? Is he your champion then? Champion. He had never heard Mary use this word before. Champion. Mary echoes, before shrugging. You know, though I supply information to the self-defense force, I'm not your ally, Jacob. The other man scowls in response to that. That was because it's an entirely different set of circumstances, Mary. He says, waving at Kuma. He's not supposed to be in the game to begin with. Why have him? Because you're one organization that's way too powerful for your own good. Mary crosses her arms. I want a balanced game, and you're trying to collect us, aren't you? I'm shifting the battle in my favor. It's a legitimate technique, the other man sulkily says. Based on what you've told me, I think you haven't chosen your king yet. Why don't you come with me? King, don't get too much of yourself, Jacob. She fiddles with her glass. Drink your gin, it's not good to leave a cocktail to warm like that. Cocktails are best finished within 20 minutes. The man levies one steady glance at her, before he downs it in 3 shots, he wipes the remaining liquid off his lips before sitting closer to Kuma. He is now 2 seats away. Shall I start, or you? Mary says, as she motions for her employee to close the doors and shut the curtains. They are shrouded in darkness, with a few oil lamps to fill the area with an eerie glow. On that day, Kuma learns more secrets about Mary than he had ever expected. It's very odd when what one views as your baby brother is chased after by someone. It's very weird when that other someone happens to be one you know. Admittedly, Hancock had known Luffy. She had gone down to Impel Down to warn him about his brother, and she had assisted their escape from Marineford. But Hancock wasn't known as the Pirate Empress for nothing. She was both domineering and cruel, imperial and arrogant, and their allies had often described her as someone not to cross, because of her devil fruit's powers as well as her general high-handed demeanor. Upon comparing her description to the currently love-struck pseudo-teenager, Ace couldn't help but feel his jaw drop. And Luffy didn't know she had the hots for him. Hancock, thank you for bringing us. The fool obliviously cried out once the Kuja ship had arrived near the Moby Dick. Oh, sure, Rayleigh had told them that someone would pick them up. Sabo had already said his goodbyes a few days later to head towards the revolutionary base, but he hadn't expected that the one who had a crush on Luffy was a Shichibukai. Thatch was currently laughing his ass off, but Marco was busy pinching himself not to bother with being amused. Boa Hancock herself was too busy pouring her attentions and favors on Luffy to notice. It's good to see you survive, brother. Brother. Ace dumbfoundedly mouthed the word, only for Thatch to go off again. Your brother and I are engaged to be married, she says dismissively, before turning back to her crush with love-filled eyes. Ace looked at her, then looked at Luffy, who's being awfully pleased with the food on offer and thus distracted from Hancock. Things can only go incredibly well, he thought, or incredibly badly. Bye Ace. Luffy gives him a tight hug, which he returns. He loves his brother, really, and if Marineford were to happen again, he'll still rescue his baby brother even with the world against him. Luffy's been bouncing on the Moby Dick for a few weeks, and his ship brothers have grown used to him. Ace is pretty sure that they'll help out if Luffy asks, because somehow he's squirmed his way into the tightly knit group without much effort. He steals from all the kitchens, spars with Ace and Sabo when he's bored, and generally fills in the cracks that Marineford and Goku's death had created within the Whitebeard pirates. It's unbelievable, what he does within a few weeks by smiling with those who could be cheered up by one and commiserating with them by remaining silent. Oh yes, Ace knew who Goku really was. And if he did things right, there's no way his shitty brother's going to end up so melancholic he's almost a different person altogether. Rayleigh has long since jumped onto the Kuja ship, and he's heard Marco breathe a sigh of relief at that. Even if Rayleigh had retired for 22 years, they're still enemies since. Rogers. It's a bit awkward talking to a man who knew your father fondly, Ace has found out. Rayleigh had described him as one crazy son of a bitch, with no survival instincts, but in the same token he calls Luffy, idiot with only meat running through his bra, and so Ace thinks it's sort of fond praise. If you were to ask about Whitebeard, they'll probably call him a crazy fool for going to your rescue as well as for various other actions. Rayleigh says as they share a drink. Ace doesn't want to hear this, but Luffy's sleeping in the next room and it's their last day on board, so Ace doesn't feel like leaving him. Ace doesn't want his baby brother to remain weak, but he's still attached to the boy who told him that he needed Ace to exist. I know you hate Roger. Hell, a lot of people hate him too. Rayleigh says, tipping rum down his throat. But a lot of people hate me and hate Whitebeard as well, because we pirates in general pissed off a lot of people. I don't care about that. Pop's the best. He's been more of a father than. Roger was too ill to have survived to your birth, even if Rouge had carried you for 9 months. Huh, the expression on his face must have signaled Rayleigh, because he sighs tiredly. Roger was never caught, did you know that? It was news to him. Gramps had always told him of how he had caught Roger, starting with a 5-day battle and ending with both of them heavily exhausted, one more than the other. He had handed himself over to the Marines, but Garp had the credit for catching him. He once told me, I'll never die, partner. Rayleigh sheds a tear in remembrance of his captain, and he never did. He started the era with his execution, and set in motion a series of events that would engulf the whole world. Just like you, and your brother. All, these don't die until they intend to die, and that's a fact with the lot. So you mean Teach wouldn't die? He hisses, because even as Thatch had survived, Goku didn't, and he still has nightmares from the smile his probable brother had given as he was wrapped in darkness. He would never forgive Teach, even if his brother was standing before him, alive and whole. He won't die until he's satisfied, if that's what you're asking. Rayleigh replies, shrugging. But you will know, of course. There's a telltale glint in his eye. You were prepared to die at Marineford, weren't you? Ace can't breathe. He had known that the execution ground would be the last he'll see of this world, and he's known that since childhood, where being the son of the Pirate King was liable to get you captured. But the thought of his brother dying in his place scares him, and Goku's own dying words scares him even more, because that was the face of someone who's really wanting to die for a very long time. Ace doesn't think he's that old to have settled all his affairs in order yet. But if it were between him and his brother, he wouldn't mind. Not at that point. Why was Goku alone until the end? Tensions were probably going to be lowered, Ace thought, once Rayleigh had gone. It'll be a bit sad to see Luffy go. Someone's left a pole on the deck. Probably one of Jozu's group. Luffy's just about to bounce off, and his footsteps on the pole. Goku's trod on a staff left unattended, but instead of tripping, he tips it into the air with his foot, and hefts it up onto his shoulder, ready to give another blow. Luffy tips it into the air with his foot, and tosses it to the person who had left it lying around. The other person nearly drops it in shock. See ya, Ace. Luffy cries, before he leaps onto the Kuja ship. They make headway towards the Isle of Women, and already Luffy is feasting on some meat on board. Ace blinks, once, twice, before he sighs. He'll have a hard time trying not to miss his still-alive baby brother. Is that what Luffy wants then? Zoro knows that his captain is dead but alive. It's a confusing feeling for the swordsman, because of all the crew, he's the one with the longest history with their captain and often the one deployed when the captain's out of action. Zoro misses the captain, and now that he's passed on to the next world, the Pirate King's crew needs to know what Luffy had done to the timestream. He's still trying to look for their allies, but he only knows of one, Shirahoshi, who's both Poseidon and the mermaid princess and the daughter of the Ryugu Kingdom royal family. It's obvious, because he knows that Shirahoshi of before had no backbone to speak of, and constantly cries. However, the mature female mermaid in front of him doesn't do that much. Sure, she's still a crybaby, that won't change, but Zoro can tell that this was the mermaid who had been one of their best friends at the time of his death. And out of their powerful allies, she's the one who's the most likely to survive. Zoro can't help but find his actions a bit cruel. Wah! Zoro is holding up a plush toy of Luffy. It isn't entirely accurate, because Luffy doesn't wear a necklace of shells, nor does his straw hat look so well kept. His is tattered and mended in places, because Luffy isn't careful with keeping his hat intact and Nami's patch-ups aren't perfect, but what's more important is that Shirahoshi loves it dearly. As does Megalo, who's trying to swim his way out of the tower to alert the guards, except Zoro's long blocked off any escape path. Thus, Zoro is slowly approaching the Luffy plush toy with a permanent marker and about to scribble vulgarity on its face, while Shirahoshi is too busy sobbing to call for her guards. It's a unique situation to be sure, but Zoro doesn't really have the heart to put her through this, so he relents and tosses the plush back to Shirahoshi, who hugs it gratefully. Once Shirahoshi stops crying, she glares at Zoro with as much force as she could muster, but Zoro's received more hateful looks than the mermaid princess, so he ignores it with ease and asks, Shirahoshi, I want an answer, please. He was my captain. Shirahoshi looks ready to fight with him for the truth by calling on her shoulders. Her lips wobbling, and she's rubbing her fingers in the manner that suggests nervousness with the situation. I can't. Luffy-sama says that we can't reveal who we choose to be king until he arrives, and we can't stick with one person, because his younger self would be very annoyed if his adventure was boring and. She gasps, holding her hand to her mouth, before saying, I did it again. Ah, Zoro smirks. So that was Luffy's idea of a king selection. Find 20 captains to stick to until they hit Raftel. Interesting. Shirahoshi's blushing with guilt, her head buried in her hands. Zoro smirks. He knows that the 20 Luffys chosen are ultimately reliable, even if they weren't as foolish as Shirahoshi. And he would get plenty of challenges now that the fight for the throne has started already. Zoro's made from currents, from wind, from movement. From the time the Straw Hat crew had started, up until his death, he had always been active, even when he was asleep. When he was reborn from particles of air and water, it still hasn't changed. His body thirsts for action still, and he would have plenty of fun fooling around with the crews who want the throne now that both possible occupants are dead. He can't wait for Raftel. He's so going to look out for the groups that make their way to Raftel, if only for the challenge that they'll bring. Right now, none of them have been found, though he thinks he knows where another has ended up. What luck, and he's not willing to wait. Maybe he'll approach Mihawk for a spar. Kobe's watching the residents' expressions carefully. Rather than appreciation and gratefulness, they're watching the marine ship with resentment. Garp's stopping at Alabasta for alcohol, and given his subordinates free time to hit the bar. Instead, Kobe's split off with Helmeppo, who wants to charm a lady, but Kobe thinks that would only end in failure once 5 minutes has passed and is heading towards the marketplace. Alabasta had been terrorized by former Shichibukai Crocodile, but the Marines had defeated him, and Captain Smoker had been given a promotion, was what had ran in the official newspapers. But what he was picking off the ground was different. Marines again, what a bother. Didn't even help, it was all due to. Crocodile's supposed to be their men, and they had let him carry on with what he's done. He was planning to destroy Alabasta all for a stone. And in the end, that Straw Hat had kicked his ass. This country had reigned for the first time in years, and it's all due to that Straw Hat. Marines didn't do shit, and yet they're the ones who. Straw Hat, Luffy. He pronounced the name out loud. You know him. A blue-haired young woman squints at him. You know Straw Hat Luffy. Yeah, the woman was quite pretty, and Kobe doesn't know how he's struck gold, but well, if things are going his way, then why complain? He rescued me from some pirates and brought me to the marine base so that I could be a marine. Luffy did. The woman tips her head and chuckles. It's like him, taking a boy to be a marine when he's a pirate. I heard that he was in Marineford. Yes, he was. He wanted to rescue his brother, and broke into impel down. There was a gasp from the woman at this, but Kobe continued, don't worry, he got out. Then he was captured again, and was sent to Marineford. How could they? She hisses with strong feeling, he didn't do anything wrong. But his brother who was supposed to rescue him turned up alive and free, and Luffy was rescued as well. He finishes. The woman heaves a sigh of relief, before grabbing her bags. Luffy's always surprising people. She shakes her head ruefully. Do you want to join me for dinner? Before Kobe could realize, she's taken his hand and dragged him off to her house. It turns out that dinner was a royal banquet, and the woman was a princess. Kobe's heart deflated in disappointment. The Marines are set to leave the next day, and while Garp's at a grocery store probably restocking on donuts, Kobe finds himself recounting his own adventures with the Alabastan royal family. They jeered and cheered at all the appropriate places, especially when Ace, whom the princess, Vivi, apparently knows, and thus smiles when Ace insults and rescues his brother in the same breath, and Sabo and Luffy reunite. Oh, what a wonderful tale. The chief of the guards, Agaram, whips out a handkerchief as he dabs at his eyes. 3 brothers reuniting after 10 years of separation. And coming back to the place of their near deaths to do things together. The king himself guffaws once Kobe shares how the brothers had fled at the sight of Luffy's grandfather. Garp is Luffy's grandfather. Oh, no wonder he had asked for so much in the food market, and ran away before he could catch them. Garp had been left yelling at them as they made their quick getaway, and the other 2 men with the royal family cheered as Garp uselessly waved his fist at them. Thank you for this, Kobe. Vivi addresses him. Would you like to know more about how Luffy saved us as well? And they tell him the truth of Alabasta. Of how Straw Hat Luffy had been caught unaware by Agaram, but instead overcame the numerical differences to defeat an entire island of bounty hunters, and at Little Garden Island, where he had rescued Vivi and 2 giants from Baroque Works members. Of how he had climbed a mountain with 2 of his crew members on his back on Wintry Drum Island, and came back with a doctor as well. Of how he had knocked down not once, but twice by Crocodile, but had found his weakness and saved Alabasta twice in a row. In return, Kobe shares what he remembers of Water 7. Of how he rescued the devil child, who Vivi referred to as Miss All Sunday, which means Luffy's nice enough to rescue his former enemies even when they had tried to kill him, and faced the world government to do so. And what he had done to deserve the loyalty of not 1, not 2, but 3 of his crewmates in return. By the time they finish, night had already broken, and the Nefertari royal family insist that he stays with them for the night. As he stares at the ceiling of the grand guest room, he can't help but think that under all circumstances, Luffy, despite his cries of being Pirate King, had acted as no pirate Kobe had ever known should. Instead, he was a hero to 3 countries already, and Kobe can't forget how Shell's town had cheered when Axe Hand Morgan was finally removed from his seat of power. Yet because he was an outlaw, because he was unwilling to bend to the wills of others, his actions were persecuted, and even covered up by the government when appealing to him with the position of Shichibukai hadn't worked. Yet, the Shichibukai weren't exactly the most moral at all. And a government who chose to cover up, to persecute others just because of their blood links, were they still a good government? Yet Vivi was part of that same world government that Luffy's dad was trying to overthrow, while Garp had believed in the justice of the Marines until Ace's and Luffy's execution. It's no use thinking about this, Kobe said to himself, and he tried to sleep. But in the morning, the seed remained. He knew then what he had to do. Vice Admiral Garp, he says, saluting his mentor. Garp was chewing on some biscuits while reading the news, utterly uncaring of the pile of paperwork on his desk, or of the evil stares that Bogard was giving him. Yes, Garp tosses his paper down. I would like to request for extra training. He knows that his observation hockey's still a work in progress, but he knows he has to get stronger, if not for the world government he is sworn to protect with, but for Luffy, because he knows that Luffy's growth rate is going to accelerate, and if he were to catch him, he would need to improve his own skills as well. The half-chewed biscuits drop out of Garp's mouth as he stares at Kobe. Kobe fidgets, but he's firm. Oh, is that so? Wahahaha. Garp rumbles with laughter, but there is a tone of thrill in them. Very well. Starting from today, prepare yourself. Fist of love. He punches, and Kobe tries to dodge, because he recognizes this move like no other. But he's not fast enough, and he gets hit with the full blow. His head spins, but a portion of his consciousness examines the move. Garp's fist isn't small, but the velocity it is moving ensures that the momentum it carries when it hits an object causes a large impact. So what he needs to do is improve his speed, if not his reaction time. Again, he steadies himself, and wills his observation hockey to work. This time, he sees the blow coming, and sidesteps. Kobe pauses, because Garp withdraws his fist and is staring at him pensively. The best way, Garp starts, to train observation hockey, is to be constantly attacked. Then he grins, and it's not the cheerful ones he gives when Sengoku starts screaming at him for something. It's more vicious, like when a predator has found its prey and found it satisfactory. Kobe's going to regret this, but he doesn't care. He needs to become stronger, to become Fleet Admiral, and thus able to change the system altogether. Wait for me, Luffy. He thinks of the man who had rescued him from Alvida, who had rescued Vivi's nation, who had rescued Drum Island. I'll be coming after you. Chapter 17, Development. Luffy's awfully tired, because Rayleigh's been throwing animal after animal at him in order to toughen him up for Conqueror's hockey. He can now knock down the leopards, but he's still working on making his stare frightful to the lions. So after his dinner, he rubs his tummy. Rayleigh's staring into the fire, as though he could read something in the flames, but Luffy knows that he's thinking of someone else. Ace, maybe. He dreams. Captain San. He frowns when he sees Robin appear. But this Robin isn't like his Robin. This Robin's reminiscent of the one who had faced them at Eni's lobby, who's really sad but doesn't like revealing her emotions. His Robin's a lot more happy and open now, but she still has moments like these. Robin is staring at a piece of fabric in thought. It's been worn in some places, and there's some threads straying from the cloth. What are you looking at? He asks, because he's never held back on his words. Robin turns towards him, and he sees that her eyes are filled with tears. It's the tapestry of time. Ah, he heard of this before. He had been staring at this mystery piece of cloth as well, before Marineford. But the one he saw as a child was newer, and less prone to stress. He doesn't know what had happened to the tapestry. But he knows it doesn't look good. What happened? Remember what I told you about the man who left his friends behind?
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
The one who left his nakama because the other alternative was dying. Luffy remembers this well, because he thinks he knows who that person was. When he had looked at the guy who had protected the old man's crew, he had felt something familiar. It was as though someone had made a copy of him, but imperfectly. He could tell that the other guy could have been him. Was it that guy who died because Teach killed him? Hey, he already didn't like the guy who liked that disgusting pie from Jaya. He had initially been ambivalent, because the other guy had told him to chase his dreams, but if the other guy also wanted One Piece. Luffy has always been selfish. That hasn't changed one iota. And the other guy's death had only increased his hatred of the Teach, because Ace and Pompadour guy and Bluebird guy had been fond of him and had been the most depressed after he had left. Luffy doesn't want to see Ace upset, because it makes him sad too, and he doesn't like the feeling of being sad. Yes, but he left behind this. She inspects the tapestry in front of her, finger scratching her chin in thought. It looks like because of his interference, time is being held shakily. For instance, this. She fingers a point that has the image of a seashell on it, and this, they're causing an adventure to go awry. Awry? He questions, what does that mean? Out of place. Because of his actions, what happens in the island beneath the sea may never take place. Robin's staring at him again. Is that wrong? Island beneath the sea, island beneath the sea. You mean Fishman Island? Exactly, she claps her hands. Because Poseidon is there in a wake, you would never have made a name for yourself. And even before that, have you heard of Trafalgar Law? Who's that? He was supposed to rescue you from Marineford, she mentions uneasily. Yet because you left Marineford unscratched, there isn't a bond between the two of you. Yet you and he are supposed to help each other. She turns and seems momentarily stunned as the loosened thread winds itself back to the tapestry of its own volition. Luffy stares at it with wonder. A moving thread. Did you see that? Yes, I did. Robin calmly replies, but there is a tone of amusement. It looks like he was thinking of what may happen after all. Thinking of what exactly? Robin smiles enigmatically, and Luffy drops out of that place. He wakes up, and dodges the log thrown at him. Rise and shine, boy. Rayleigh abandons the treetops he's taken to, and instead heaves a bucket of rocks. Time for training. Luffy groans as Rayleigh shoves the rocks at high speed. If he didn't have Haki, he would have been knocked out by the rocks, only for Rayleigh to use the opportunity to try to wrestle him, and it's not long before it turns into a challenge of Conqueror's Haki, where the winner gets to take the remaining meat for breakfast and the loser has to hunt. It takes 5 minutes before Luffy hits the ground. Rayleigh flexes his fingers, and the black metallic coating recedes. You need to practice more of your armament before you get into a wrestling contest with me. Rayleigh marches off, while Luffy, huffing from the effort of wrestling Rayleigh, groans and takes off for the deep forests, where he is sure he's found a couple of interesting deer. The deer turn out to be foxes, and he's chased all over the island as the Vulpines attempt to pounce on their would-be invader. Luffy would be perfectly fine with it, were the island not in the middle of winter season. And he's not had any warm clothes, because they had decayed in the autumn season 1 week ago. This island's weather was so strange. He wonders how the rest of them were doing. Nami would be too busy noting the frequent changes of weather. Zoro would be going after the alcohol tree that Rayleigh was fond of. Sanji would be trying to cook that amazing-looking deer if he had managed to kick it down. Brook would be playing Binks, Sake while the monkeys dance, while Usopp would be hiding in a treetop in fear from the numerous jackals in the southwest of the island. Frankie would be on board the ship, trying to increase room by making use of the wonderfully hard tree that Luffy's found for creating a small hut. He can't wait to see them again in 1.5 years' time. I'm sorry, but you're not my type, Shirahoshi says in front of the mirror. She shakes her head. No, it sounded too regal, and that was not what Vanderdecken had needed. Now that she was making her debut out into the world, Shirahoshi knew she had to practice. Yet, because she hadn't made a name for herself, hadn't become Poseidon of the Pirate King, she wasn't reliable enough to act as a pillar of support for the Pirate King. That had to change, because Luffy needed strong helpers, and Shirahoshi was determined not to be left behind when Luffy-sama conquers the Grand Line. Shirahoshi, her brother sternly says. Are you sure about this? He seems impatient, and no wonder, because he's been stuck here the whole day while Shirahoshi is preparing to leave the confines of her towers in years. To Shirahoshi, this was laughable, because she had swum far beyond the borders of Fishman Island long before this, and she's not meant to be trapped here like that. Yes, Fukabashi, she replies, straightening her hair tie. Fukabashi sighs, before he rights himself and goes to open the doors to the waiting chambers of the royal family. Her father is there, as is her 2 other brothers, and the minister of the left. All are anxious, because to them, Shirahoshi's been sheltered since her mother's death, and they're afraid that she would burst out in tears. She knows that her family's trying to be kind, but that hadn't benefited her because when Luffy-sama came, she hadn't been able to swim fast enough to lead Noah away from Fishman Island, and that had been a disaster were it not for Luffy. She steps forward. Her father looks ready to burst into tears himself, but he steadies, and reaches a hand to hug the daughter he's never seen in years except in yearly meetings. Shirahoshi tears up, if not for the exact same reasons. It's been so long since she had seen her father, and Fishman Island by extension as it used to be. She casts her gaze through the small windows that peer into the outside world. She's scared, but at the same time she's willing to be brave. Because this was what Luffy had wanted to do for her, and she's planning on taking it with both hands if necessary. Father, I wish to step outside to see my mother. Not too imperious, but not too timid. The effect was that her father does start sobbing, much to her embarrassment, while her brothers start to cheer. So do her guards, because even if they would be accompanying her, it would be the first time they've been outside while on duty, and they'll enjoy not being in the suffocating atmosphere of the palace all the time. It's not much, stepping outside. But at the same time, she breathes, and allows both merman and fishman alike to stare at her. She beams prettily, and most cheer to see the secluded royal princess. It doesn't take long for Shirahoshi to spot Vanderdecken. The fishman is peering at her, and when he realizes that it is the mermaid princess, he comes forward, with a box in hand. The guards come to her aid, but she stands firm until Vanderdecken is barely less than 3 people away from her. Would you not become my bride? There are hisses in the background, but Vanderdecken doesn't bother as he reaches out for her hand and... I'm not your type. Oops, that came out wrong. And you're not mine either. Vanderdecken's face darkens with rage, and no wonder, because Shirahoshi herself is barely restraining herself. You send love notes, in the form of weapons at me. You write wedding invitations before even proposing to me. May I ask why you wish to marry me if your only intent is to hurt me? But, Vanderdecken growls, aren't you supposed to be all sultry and loving? Not to people who hit me. Then to add insult to injury, she adds, I hate you. Vanderdecken seems to bubble with anger. Then no one shall have you. He throws a gigantic axe, eyes on her right arm. He expects her to falter, for her to scream for help, and he would rescue her and become her hero. But Shirahoshi wants no hero to rescue her except Luffy-sama, which is why she simply lifts her hand. And the axe misses her entirely, landing on the floor. Vanderdecken's eyes widen, but it is too late. The guards have long since surrounded him, and he is trapped in sea-stone handcuffs, ready to be imprisoned. There was no way he could inflict any of his curses on the army, because he is still staring in shock where his axe had missed Shirahoshi cleanly. Shirahoshi stares at her arm, and silently thanks Luffy-sama for his help. With Vanderdecken safely locked away, she is free to participate in what happens outside. First, she shall visit her mother's grave, because she hasn't visited it in a very long time, and in this time, not visited at all. Then, she will try to live out her mother's legacy. Who knows, maybe Fishman Island wouldn't need Luffy to intervene if their own internal problems were resolved after all. That would be one less burden on her captain. Thatch is busy preparing a meal when Ace comes knocking in. Ace has been in a sulk since Luffy had left for training. It's no wonder, because Luffy's like a bouncing ball of sunshine, and he's tried various things which would have unleashed fiery hell were he none other than Ace's baby brother. From making his brother model a papier-mâché mask, to putting chopsticks in his nose to stealing meat directly from his brother's plate, okay, maybe not that one. Ace had came out of a spar in less than 15 minutes while Luffy smelled like lightly toasted rubber. It's a disgusting smell which makes Thatch's nose wrinkle in memory. Now that Luffy was gone, Ace was busy training up when he isn't moping, which is saying something because Ace's training regime was tough already what with the 200 crunches and sit-ups he's making himself do. Now, Ace is trying to learn how to fly. It does make for some interesting moments, especially when he tries to modify his arms to provide enough lift. All he does is to create a set of demonic-looking wings that doesn't do shit and he goes plummeting down into the ocean a few minutes later. Namor complains every time he does so, but it doesn't stop him from yelping when Ace does his best imitation of a dive bomb. Or from jumping into the ocean with a grumble. What are you cooking? Ace stinks of sweat and saltwater. No wonder, because one time he gets too close to the deck, the shipwright and he got into a fight about where he does his training and the next he gets flung through the railings because of the burnt atom wood. So he tends to do most of his flying stunts on the sea because he can't be sure that his gliding skills would get him away from easily damaged storerooms. Ace is staring at the stove with a strange look on his face. Thatch, the fire that's closest to the stove is the warmest, right? It's a strange question, but Thatch acquiesces. Yeah, the red part's the warmest at the top, followed by the orange, then yellow, then white. White. Ace flicks his finger, and his hands come up orange with flames. So there is a hotter temperature, I see. Oi, Ace, what are you planning to do? But Ace heads back out, and Thatch sighs as he watches the 2nd Division commander. Thatch knows that he doesn't want to end up being stabbed or killed by Teach, but at the same time he's at a loss as to what to do. He's not willing to take in on a devil fruit, because he still sees the need to swim being useful. Furthermore, with Marco, Ace, Jozu and Pops all being fruit users, he doesn't see how any ability he could acquire could help to protect his brothers as well. He throws the thin egg noodles once, twice into the air with a net, before straining it further. He sprays soy sauce and oyster sauce onto the bowl, before arranging the noodles in a spiral shape. Then, he adds chashu and dumplings at the side with some spring onions and fried onion shallots for garnishing. Thatch has always found cooking to be a pleasure. Not only did it steady his hands, it provided him some work to do. He's not like Ace, who just shoves everything into his mouth without minding the quality of food. As a gourmet, he usually tries out new dishes from both the Four Blues and the Grand Line when he wants to concentrate on something. This time round, it's from Ko Island. He places the plate on the table, and prepares to eat. The bowl of noodles move. Then, they swirl, and rearrange themselves to form a very familiar face. Pompadour head. It's a sad day when because of all the shit that Thatch has been through these past few weeks, his tolerance level for weird things has risen alarmingly high. So he curses the head of noodles which has despoiled his meal once more, before crossing his arms and staring back at the god of food that had possessed his bowl of ramen and now his bowl of chashu noodles with dumplings. What do you want? Not going to faint. Thatch is pissed that he has to throw out this batch as well. Our captain died. You saw the paper right. Thatch sits down, because his legs feel like lead. Goku had saved him. He had rescued the whole crew without a word of thanks, and when Teach came along he was the one who had fought, casting them all aside because he didn't want the Whitebeard crew to get hurt. It's a selfless thing, but Thatch wished that they could have helped out as well. Because of what our captain started, we're trying to look out for the individuals that our captains picked out for Raftel. Individuals. Marco comes in, and he's staring at the bowl of noodles turned anthropomorphism of the devil. Tell us. Why should I? The figure flicked an eyebrow at him. After all, it's none of your business. I'm just passing on the message to Pompadour Head because our captain decided to rescue him with no rhyme or reason and we think that he's a potential candidate for the 20 Guardians. But it looks like he's not, so I'm just going to go away. Not so fast. Thatch has managed to get hold of a kitchen knife, and he's holding it to the piece of chashu that forms part of the figure's face. Goku was part of our crew. He sacrificed his life for us. We ought to know what is happening. Oh, the god of food, sneered. How come? That knife won't do anything anyway. Oh, it won't. But we do know of someone who he had contacted. Marco says, crossing his arms. So you're going to tell us everything you know, or we won't fess up. The figure glares, but he doesn't disappear when Marco slams the bowl of egg noodles onto the table in the infirmary. Haruta, having eavesdropped on the conversation beforehand, had already gathered the majority of the commanders in the infirmary, and they are fidgeting as the god of food tries to stare down at them but is failing to do so. It's hard to be intimidated once the event has occurred, and Thatch, who had initially been surprised at the sight of his ramen being animated, has long since gotten used to the idea that strange things occur around Goku. That hadn't changed at all, even after he died. Okay. The figure allows a trail of smoke to emit from the stick of spinach he's using like a cigarette. What we, the Pirate King's crew know is that Goku had, along with 20 others, traveled back in time. We don't know how it happened, but as far as we know, our captain's abilities never had time manipulation as part of his abilities. Thatch notices that Ace, out of all of the division commanders present, didn't seem to be surprised at the thought of time travel. Marco had his usual stoic expression on, but that's only because he's trying to mask his shock. Time travel? Izo queries. Is that possible? Don't underestimate our captain. He's capable of overriding reality, so this is probably within the realm of possibilities for him. The god of food replies. Raftel's being slightly twitchy at the moment, but because of our captain's death. He hisses, probably at the thought of Teach having killed him by squeezing him to death until water pops out like a balloon. Raftel is open, but it's not where the maps describe. We're looking for those 20, because we can't understand the degree that he's changed things until we get who the 20 is straightened out. 20 what, exactly? Marco says, placing his chin on his hands. 20 guardians, each with a degree of control of something that affects sailing. Like the weather, or the currents, or the quality of food that is served. To give an example, our swordsman moves as fast and cuts as clean as the wind. He motions to the bowl. And all of us want to know what is the level of things that could change, because our archaeologists suspecting that because of time going haywire, our own knowledge of certain things might be different from before. In your point, what the captain has done is start the king selection. Roger's supposed to be the one holding court, but well you know he got executed and all, so the captain has to do it in his place. In our timeline, there wasn't any such thing, and by right there shouldn't be such a thing either, but when Captain tried to place new pieces on the board, others are looking at the power they would wield instead of the keys that they possess towards Raftel. In other words, Marco summarizes, there's going to be more fights breaking out, because people are going to get more powers like devil fruits in order to fight for territory of their own. He's frowning in thought, a common sight these days because he's taking on a few more captain's duties while Pops is recovering. Thatch doesn't like the look of stress that Marco constantly wears, and all of the division commanders are worried, but Marco doesn't seem to want to open up to them. Thatch does not like it, but the entire crew, and him by extension could feel that Marco's not ready for taking over the role of captain if Pops were to hand it over. Pops has been told to stick to the bed, and he nods off to sleep more often than not. The nurses think that it's more healthy this way for his wound to recover, but there's a heavy weight hanging over their eyes. Thatch tries to avoid the subject in his mind, but he sees that at this rate, Marco might become the next captain, and it won't be a good fit on him, not in the way it wears on Pops or on Goku. Most of all, Thatch is afraid that Pops would die. He knows it's inevitable, as most pirates die before they hit 50 in the Grand Line, and Pops has long overshot that, but the thought of him passing on is almost akin to blasphemy, because their reliance on him is that strong. They are afraid to part from him, and Thatch is anxious at the thought of missing the glue that sticks the Whitebeard pirates together. Exactly. Unlike the devil fruits though, there's a personality behind each of those powers, and we're looking at the allies that we have helped. However, the figure grows solemn, the Self-Defense Force and the Revolutionary Army are after the 20 as well. Sure, they've been more subtle and lenient, but at the same time they have their own eyes on the throne. With our captain, both were willing to let him become king because the two leaders were friends with him and they share a commonality, but now with the captain gone, the two aren't working well together at all. The Pirate King's crew. Curiel stretches 3 fingers, and folds one down, the Self-Defense Force and the Revolutionary Army. Those were the 3 mentioned in the notice, weren't they? Yeah, I'm not surprised that the Self-Defense Forces is unfamiliar to you. It was only created a few years after this, so many of its members are unknown to us. However, the key thing is that the heads of the 3 powers of the sea had came back 50 years ago, while we had only managed to piece ourselves together recently. So they've got a long time to hide, and the captain managed to place a law, preventing us from chasing away the 2 other powers. Hang on. Thatch brings up, because what the god of food just said sounded totally wrong. The three powers aren't those three in question. What happened to the Shichibukai, the Yonko, and the Marines? Because it's weird that the previous two hasn't been mentioned, even as the king had passed on in the future. The balance of power got altered quite a bit. The figure says dryly. Time travel is pretty weird like that. He pauses, and then nods, as though he was listening to someone else even if the commanders had not spoke. I see, interesting. So our captain was thinking. Wait, what am I saying? When does he think? He scratches his head in confusion. He's not capable of deep thought like that. He turns towards the commanders. Apparently, the 20 Guardians were capable of mending the mistakes that the captain had made when appearing in the past. My crewmate just got back to me. It looks like he's got plenty of support, even if the self-defense force are trying to pressure the Guardians into joining them. He scratches his chin. Now, I told you enough about this game. My question, when did our captain leave the boat? Let's see, Marco pats his chin. Sabayati Archipelago, Fishman Island, Marineford, those three locations, should be right, he's looking for something familiar. I think I'll go to Fishman. Damn, he suddenly hisses, spitting out a few stalks of vegetable. I wanted to see the mermaids, you shitty moss-head sword freak. Why must you deny me? No, I don't care about my communication skills being more important. What do you think a mermaid is? She's the perfection of human beauty, of elegance, and best of all, no panties. What did you just say? Take that back, I know my mission as well as you. I'm going to Mermaid Lagoon. I don't care if they don't see me, after all the mermaids are important and hot and sexy. The figure stops speaking, and hisses once again, before it descends back into the plate. All those presently available crammed their heads peering at the plate as Thatch poked at the set of noodles with a pair of chopsticks. The food didn't move again. Did anyone think that he's explained stuff satisfactorily? Thatch asks, because he can't be the only one bamboozled by the sudden turn in conversation. Because I'm having more questions than answers right now. Without hesitation, all present nodded in agreement. He is unsure of his name. All three bring bad associations, but at the same time, he's got to answer to something, so he uses Mary's name for him when at the bar and answers to what his kid calls him, but that's it, is stunned. Bad suggestion 204, he thought, as Mary cheerfully introduces to him their newest employee. Mary's done it again. This is Kuma. He'll be helping us carry the heavy weights when unloading from the truck. Kuma, this is R.O. He's my other employee. Mary, as happy-go-lucky as she acts, is not oblivious to the stares he's giving her. R.O. knows he should be alarmed at his boss's frequent and often strange impulses, but this time she's gone overboard now. Boss, you do know who Kuma is, right? Doesn't he have an existing job already? Despite her nature, Mary isn't oblivious. She huffs as she places her hands on her hip in response. Of course I do. But Kuma's on our side now. Kuma, the tyrant, is staring blankly ahead, and R.O. can't tell if he was aware of what the boss had wanted when she had dragged him over. It's a pleasure to meet you, he says politely, because unlike his brother, he's been instilled with good manners and he's determined to show it. I look forward to working with you. For a second, R.O. thought that he was going to start firing lasers at him. But the Shichibukai nods in acknowledgement, before turning to follow Mary into the kitchen. R.O. heaves a sigh of relief, before turning to do the plates. He's less careless with his movements, but he still has to pay full attention to each movement, because he knows that if he tries to multitask or think of different things at the same time, he's bound to have another accident. And he still hasn't stopped feeling embarrassed whenever he stares at the jar that contains quite a few coins for each injury he causes himself, one coin at a time. He's going to fund the next ladies' night by himself if this keeps up. For the next few days, they skirt around each other. Kuma's usually busy in the back house when he's on the island, so R.O. tries to remain in the bar. He avoids the gaze of others and skirts around customers, which has led to an incredibly busy head bartender, but he's still okay with mixing drinks. He spent 5 years carefully pouring and re-pouring, and if it were him 11.5 years ago, he would have been amazed that he didn't break 3 glasses each week. In the meantime, Kuma usually remains in the back room, or guarding the Straw Hats boat when he's not absent from Sabayati altogether. Finally, Mary's grown sick and tired of their avoiding around each other, and tosses both of them into the back room after work, calling them to get their shit together because the tension's way too much. There is an awkward silence that stretches across minutes as the two stare at each other. R.O. fidgets under the blankness of Kuma's eyes. He had no pupils, okay. R.O. had a legitimate reason to be scared of him. He knows how fearsome Kuma could be, because he's a former Marine after all, and he's seen the bare sketches of the operation that Kuma's supposed to have gone through before that fateful undercover mission. Quote. Kuma's not exactly a conversation starter either, and Ro's always been comfortable with silences, but really. Mary can't handle cleaning up by herself, and someone's got to look after her because she's one lone woman in a place packed with men, and Ro's grown to care for her for the last 2 years. I'll start. R.O. starts ruefully. I guess that what Vegapunk did to you failed. He winces the moments the words come out of his mouth. Yeah, that was a surefire way to piss your conversation partner off. Bravo, he thought sarcastically to himself. Quote. Affirmative. Ro scratches his head nervously, because how the hell do you launch yourself into such a conversation? He's always been on the listening side. To have someone who is even more silent than him is strange. So it must be strange, right? The man is looking at him in an inquisitive manner, so he hesitates, before carrying on impulsively. I think I can understand that. About things not going like you want them to. Because you think that it's alright, things will be okay so you can pass on now and whoever you're protecting will be fine. Instead, you survive, and he thinks back to the grieved expression on the child-turned man's face when he blearily opened his eyes. He couldn't hear his kid's words, because not only were they mangled by the kid sobbing, his hearing wasn't working properly and he was still trying to puzzle out what the kid was saying when he passed out again. You wonder why the hell you're alive. You think that matters that were supposedly finished upon your death weren't settled at all. So there's this uncomfortable feeling in your chest, because you miss what relationships you used to have, and that niche you fit in before doesn't actually hold you, because others change with years and yet you're still constant and feel left out. So you carve a new niche for yourself, and, yeah, I should probably stop talking now. And he stops because he doesn't know what to say. He realizes that in some ways, he can understand what Kuma's going through. It's not a happy thought. Quote. Did I say something wrong? He scratches his head because he probably has long overstepped the boundaries of politeness. No. Kuma taps his book. It's a Bible, one that Ro knows his father had kept in his desk when he was younger, but had subsequently sold away in poorer times. Ro and his brother stopped believing in any higher entity above right about the time they were caught and hung, and he doesn't believe in fate, but his kid still does, so they don't really discuss it at all, because it makes for awkward conversations and they instead move on to the things they can agree on. When you engage with others, you want to make the best impression of yourself. But because you're using preconceived interpretations, your own interpretation causes you to say things that you normally won't say out loud at all. I personally feel that what defines a person is not just his memories, but his personality. Then should not the core of a person be his soul then? Kuma asks politely. If you think of it that way. Ro pauses, recalling the period between dying and waking up. In my own experience, I think a person's not just a soul. It's the sum of his relationships, and the way he behaves, and the memories that he has of others. He says, thinking back to when he and his kid had danced around the subject of his brother for weeks. They were discussing whether his brother could truly be saved. His kid had argued that after being shot, Ro was in no disposition to forgive him, but the teenager hadn't been through the same experiences that he and his brother had. Sure, they've been through crushing blows. But the kid succeeded where his brother had thrown himself back into the position of being the one that bullies rather than the one who stands up for the rest of his friends. Even when Ro knows that his brother is a monster in all the ways that matter, he still can't imagine the thought of his brother dying. It's too visceral, especially after feeling the blood of his father covering himself as his brother walked away with his father's dead head. It's up to you as to how you perceive yourself. He realizes. If you choose to be a tyrant, then you are. If you choose to be a normal person, if you think of yourself in terms of relationships, in terms of days that you've worked, in terms of the memories you accumulate with others. You only die really when you're forgotten. Kuma's eyes widened. To give an example, Gold Roger hasn't died yet. His ghost, soul, if you call it that way, continues to haunt this world because what he says lives on. Equally, our loved ones never leave us, because what they do, what remains of them is memories of others, and be it good or bad, it's still what they leave behind. So if you were to say you died, then you haven't really left this world until there's no one who remembers you, be it firsthand or through accounts from others. Ro finishes, staring at the table and examining the lines in the wood. He peeks a glance upwards, and his jaw doesn't drop in shock, but it's close. Kuma has frozen, having long since abandoned his Bible and has chosen instead to mouth the words, forgotten memories. Before Ro could say anything, the bulky man dashes away in a headlong rush, leaving behind an outline of him in the wood. Ro shakes his head, and goes towards the bar to help Mary out with her roaring business after putting in a hasty repair of the hole in the backroom wall. Kuma doesn't come back until well over midnight, and when he wakes up to get a cup of water, Kuma's sitting on the bar stool. Instead of speaking, he's flipping the pages of a book. It's not a Bible that Ro recognizes, and he goes closer for a look. It's one that is currently being displayed on bookshelves as a volume in a popular series, but the face of the author is familiar to him, because it's the customer, Jacob, whose arrival had precipitated one of the biggest reveals of his existence. Is it any good? He says, because even if he knows the identity of the author, he didn't really peg the guy as a good teller of stories. Maybe a former officer with quirks, but definitely not one that he would immediately point out as someone who writes. Yes. Ro hums. He thinks that though they're still a bit strange around each other, Kuma seems to cheer up a bit more. Sengoku comes, more often than what his duty as fleet admiral may suggest, but he's never spotted Kuma anyway, because Ro's always standing outside waiting for him when he senses his foster father. What is a name? It is merely what one would use to refer to oneself. The sum of what you are. I haven't given my full name to you, have I? Mary perks up, but she pretends not to listen. Kuma on the other hand shrugs. It has not come up in our conversation before. Is it important? Yes. He's only revealed it to 3 people thus far. Kuma would be the third, and those 2 had already known beforehand who he was. It's